What is up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work to Game, and I've been streaming a little bit of WoW and 14 lately and have noticed a lot of WoW refugees, like everywhere else, have found their way to Work to Game. And so I've gone out and I've looked for a series of FAQs that I could kind of just discuss and go over and elaborate on. And so this one is going to be based around the Reddit WoW refugee kind of breakdown. It's originally posted by Moldy Whale, so thank you so much for giving this outline. And let's kind of jump into kind of my opinion on some of these things. And I think that it's really well written. I think that there's very little that is missed here. So if you'd prefer a written guide, that's where to go. But if you'd prefer it to just be kind of read to you, and let's talk about kind of my opinion on it and things like that. As somebody who played WoW from 2004 all the way to the end of Pandaria, took Draenor off and then came back at Legion and still has an active subscription today. And then somebody who's been playing Final Fantasy since 2.0. I did not play during 1.0 as many times as Bryan tried to get me in. And I have been playing constantly since then and am looking forward to Shadowbringers as we get ready for it this summer. So, WoW refugees. You've made the jump. You've decided that you want to try Final Fantasy XIV. Maybe you're also trying ESO, Guild Wars, things like that. I'm not an expert on those. I have played them, but not an expert there at all, especially in current content. So Final Fantasy and WoW have a lot of things in common. They're two distinct games, but they're in the same genre. So the same way you'd compare different movies in the same genre, different books in the same genre, a lot of things come from the same design issues coming up. And so both games have flying mounts. Both games have PvP. Both games have to have an inventory system and a combat system. And so when you put devs, even from different parts of the world with different languages and things like that, into a room to solve these issues, they aren't solving in a vacuum, so they're 100% learning from each other and expanding on each other, but they also have their own way of doing things, and they solve things, and they sometimes work out with differences. And those differences can be everything from, oh, that's just a little different. That's interesting how similar they are, but it's not quite the same, to, oh my gosh, this is a totally different system, and I either A, like it better, or I just feel it's different, or oh my, I think this is terrible, and I wish that they would learn from them how to at least slide more in that direction, if not implement their version of that entirely. So let's talk through kind of what this article says on Reddit. So the first, they've broken down things into good and bad. I don't necessarily agree with kind of viewing it like that. So the first thing is they said Azeroth sucks. So they're talking about the AP grind. So for any Final Fantasy people watching this, AP is basically what has moved to being kind of their form of end-game progression from a gearing standpoint, much like our Relic. So when we talk about Final Fantasy XIV, Relic is probably the most similar thing. There is no RNG anywhere in the gearing in 14. That's not how it works. When an item drops, it's always the same eye level. It's pretty much, you have the same stats. Even within that, item modification is very limited. So you can change the way it looks, which is called glamour versus transmog. And then you can actually modify its stats by putting in these gems, which are called materia. There's not a class that makes materia. Materia is made through converting down gear or finding it. And it gets slotted in. It can actually get retrieved out. There's a failure rate associated with that based on the level of materia you slot in, and that's what modifies for your stat priority. But there's very little modification, and typically if you're a tank and a piece of tank loot drops and it has a higher eye level than your current piece of equipped tank loot, it's an upgrade. And so 9 times out of 10, like you'd be totally fine in your strategy of just pursuing gear built and meant for your class and just going for the highest eye level possible, and it would just take care of itself. You're going to get a fixed number of tokens that drop every week. You're going for what's called tomestones. There's a tomestone cap, and that's basically your weekly cap. So imagine that's like running your M plus to basically have that chance at a drop and things like that, running your LFRs. So tokens are what drop from your form of LFRs. They are called alliance raids here. They are 3 8-man groups to form a total of a 24-man. The content is designed to be done where like maybe each group A, B, and C has a different task to do, or maybe they're all focused on a combined task. Maybe they're kind of racing alongside each other. There's different things that take place, and then they're going to be dropping tokens. Those get traded in for gear. And then as we progress through the expansion, you're going to need kind of those different tokens. So you want to collect your week pretty much every single week, the same way you would kind of go back and you would either cap on valor or justice, looking at things like that, and this is all done through, it drops through everything. So the same way you can get AP from everything in WoW, You get tomes for completing roulettes at cap. You get tomes for all sorts of stuff. Eureka, all this different stuff has dropped tomes at cap. I assume that they're going to add, if not versus subtract, the number of ways we get that in Shadowbringers. And then those tomes are used as a currency to just buy the gear from the vendor, as opposed to the more randomized system that WoW has gone with as of late. So the second is that they're talking about the communication. So they're talking about communication with the community, and we get what's called live letters here in Final Fantasy XIV. So instead of there being just developer letters and a little bit of posting here and there, and most of it being done through like Wowhead kind of parsing things, we get a lot of communication directly from our producer, Yoshi P. So Yoshida is somebody that you're going to become very familiar with. You're going to recognize his face. We get patches every 3.5 months. We're on a 2-year cycle, just like WoW. They alternate years. So if you're jumping between games, it works really well. And that way, if you're kind of struggling with that, Final Fantasy also doesn't just totally wipe everything. It's very iterative, and that's both a pro and a con. The good side of it is that you never worry about them just destroying everything you did and say, hey, we're just totally wiping the class balance, and we're totally starting everything over, and then you'll just go through this kind of roller coaster all over again. The downside of that being that they haven't really innovated from Stormblood to Heaven's Word, and they may not from Shadowbringers over Stormblood. So I don't know. We'll see how that turns out, but the benefit is that once you're invested in a character and you like playing a certain class, your rotation and all of that is going to keep the same tone. We do get new abilities with each expansion, which WoW has kind of moved away from. We have a lot of ability bloat, so you have things moving around, you have buttons being combined, and that gets done through battle system changes that come out fairly often. You don't have the same, like, I think that Heaven's Word and Stormblood, there wasn't one like way over another, but it's hard to compare those. They talk about Legion being better than BFA. It's like, well, when you're comparing expansions and you're looking at the roller coaster, just keep in mind that WoW has what you have: Vanilla, then Burning Crusade, then Wrath of the Lich King, then Cataclysm, then we moved into Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, Legion, and then the current content. So that's our 8.0 for BFA. And when we talk about Final Fantasy, we had 1.0, but we basically totally scrapped it. Think Destiny 1, Destiny 2, but you got to keep your character. And so there are remnants because it is still the same game and it moved over, and those people have cheaper subs and stuff like that. But by moving into 2.0, we have 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and now 5.0. So we really only have 4 expansions to compare. So when you see people comparing different things like that, so it's not really apples to apples here. Now, when we talk about the bad on this list, it says M+, and no plans either. Now, Yoshipi has expressed at various panels and things like that, that he has an interest in expanding the achievement system, and that in that he's interested in ideas like get an achievement for running this dungeon with less gear on, or running things below the recommended eye level, or whatever. And so they haven't added anything literally M+, but like, his dream come true is to work on a Diablo team. That's one of the many projects that Yoshi said he would do outside. Yoshida said that he would do outside of Final Fantasy. If he could go work on anything, it would love to be a Diablo. So to see a Rift style system, I don't necessarily agree with this article saying no plans either, just that they're not anywhere in the future. And this game, when they say they're going to do something, they're very transparent. So they a lot of times share things with us, and then they don't come out for a very long time. We've been waiting on something called Eggy Glamours for a very long time, and they just don't happen. So just keep in mind that when you're looking at that kind of end game, it's very different over here. Now, 14's rating is a thing that exists, and there are statics over here, which is kind of what people call their raid groups. And there's even people that have an FF logs, which is where you kind of see your it's run by the same person who runs Warcraft logs. So it's where you kind of see things. There is competition, there is theory crafters, but the developers don't necessarily embrace that community for fear of what it will lead, in the same way that WoW does with World First and all that, because they don't necessarily want that kind of unhealthy relationship. They encourage you, take breaks, whatever. It's totally cool. We just want you to enjoy our game. Don't let it ruin your life. Now, one of the questions, it says the bad here, can I zoom to max level and just start farming gear? That's the next section here. Now, Final Fantasy is all about story. And if you're not about story, that's okay. Neither am I. I skip a lot of cutscenes. I share this channel with another guy, Bryan. He watches all the cutscenes, super into lore, has all the little like appendixes and encyclopedias and stuff. I don't. It's not my thing. I'm a WoW baby. And so because WoW is what taught me to play, and playing back in the day, it was about like, oh, are you not at cap? Get to cap, get to cap, get to cap. And so that's kind of bred into me. And so I can't help but hit that escape key. And like, even when I want to watch lore, I just feel one hand just, and like I have to do it. And so that's just how I play. And I know there's lore people in WoW, and there's other players like me in 14. Keep in mind that 14, we play on PS4 and Mac, and PC. The Mac client is kind of garbage right now, so I wouldn't do that. But PC, and we play cross-platform, so you have controller players. So it really encourages this sit on the couch, enjoy the story type mentality, and everything is locked behind it. So your main story quest is locked behind it. You're starting to see that a little bit as you get into like BFA with like things being locked behind the war quests and all that. But this is everything. Your dungeons are locked behind it. Your raids are locked behind it. And at this point, they've buffed the experience to it so much that you almost don't have to do anything but this to level up. But that means that you have to do all these quests, and there's hundreds of them. And there is a level skip potion, but instead of being granted to you like it is in WoW, when you get an account and you're kind of getting one free boost per expansion now seems to be the new trend. Or you could buy it with WoW Gold. There is no token in 14. You are talking about there being a purchasable one, but you have to decide, do I want to skip just the story, or do I want to boost a character? And so you have to go buy a potion if you want to do that. And getting into this game, you could get to max level without story. There just isn't any reason to. So the best way to level is story. People are like, oh, but deep dungeon's faster. Ignore them. They're talking about alternate classes and all that. You have to do the story anyway, so do the story. It is the best thing you can do. Do your story, finish your story, finish your story. If you listen to nothing else in any of our videos, please God, finish your story. And use your limit break, but finish your story. So the next thing they talk about as a bad thing is the global cooldown. Now, the global cooldown, it's a lot longer. I mean, you're talking about a 2.5 second global cooldown. What's the one in WoW? Like half a second? It's massively longer. It makes it feel more like a dance. Each ability, if you get off your rotation, it's a big deal. You lost 2.5 seconds. But at higher levels, this gets a lot better. You have a lot of off the global cooldown and things like that proc. And so you have plenty going on, but when you're leveling, it is just slow combat, and you're not pulling the way you pull in WoW. In WoW, I log on to my druid tank, I run out in the world, and it's like, hey, for this quest that's your current level, you just moved into BFA, you just hit cap, it says kill 10 things. I see 10 things. I'm going to pull all of them and kill it by myself. That's not a thing in 14. So the world is not dangerous, but there is a pace to it. And so one of the things that this also points out isn't everybody just a weeb. It is a Japanese game. And so you have a lot of people who play Japanese games because they like Japanese things. So they like Japanese anime, they like JRPGs and all of that. But this is also, there's a very established North American market here. WoW has been around since before there were really other MMOs of this style. And so like EverQuest and stuff, back when an MMO was really kind of establishing itself as a genre. And WoW has been around so long as one iteration that there are players who played it, and it's really been a mass definition of their MMO experience, or maybe even their gaming experience. So it's become more of a lifestyle game and less of a genre to them. And so, there are people who just like MMOs, and they play games like ESO and Guild Wars and 14. So welcome to the other side of the world. WoW's been the biggest for so long that they've kind of isolated themselves in some cases. But over here, there are people who jump game to game and try different things like that. And 14 just happens to be the biggest of those. Some people calculate 14 as having a bigger active subscription than WoW right now because BFA is so unpopular. But there's really no way to know since nobody will release official numbers. But just know that it's not just a weeb game. And they're starting to add things like races. I think Hrothgar was largely added to target players who aren't necessarily looking for the traditional, more anime style racial looks. All the classes kind of look a little bit similar. Hrothgar's a step in the right direction. And so Now they move on to things that they call the rest, and they say you don't need alts. That is one of the single biggest differences in the way this game works. You are all the classes, you are all the specs, you are everything. So instead of having one class that has a handful of specs, each job is always that job. A paladin is always a tank, a warrior is always a tank, a dark knight is always a tank, a white mage is always a healer. Each job is very literal in how it's, so you don't have like, oh, I have a different rotation than you and I have a different spec than, no. Everybody's fixed, but you get to be all of them, and it's determined by which weapon you have equipped. So it's very, very different. You don't really need alts per se. There are people that have them, but it's typically for playing through the story again, which they're hopefully going to add in Shadowbringers with a thing called Story Plus, where you can go back and play that, or playing on a different data center. We now have World Visit, but it's very different than the way sharding works. Sharding, it literally just jumps you around to kind of fill the server with the appropriate number of players, no more, no less. So it can split you apart, it can pull you together, and it's happening all the time. And that means you can be running towards a mining main to grab it, and it can disappear right in front of your eyes. World Visit is a manual opt-in thing. And because of that, I can go opt into the open world content, or through a system called Party Finder, I can opt in, which is kind of like their dungeon finder. I can actually opt in and I can go play content with different raid groups and things like that. I can do all forms of content with everybody on my data center. There is no way currently to cross data centers. So even within the North American market, there are 3 data centers. In Europe, there's two. And then we have Japanese. And like Australia, there's a ton of players in Australia, and they just kind of get stuck deciding do they want to play on the closer servers or the servers that speak their language. Add-ons. Before I move on to add-ons, let's also say with alts, professions. In WoW, you actually pick 2 professions, and that includes gathering and crafting in that. You can only pick 2 per character, so that's why people spin up a ton of alts. In 14, you can be all of them. Now, there's some limitations to like how you master things, but you can be all of them. You can be all the things, which is great. So add-ons. 14 has a terms of service that explicitly bans add-ons, pretty much of any kind, which means there is no open API support. There is no dialogue there. So when it comes to modifying their UI, a lot of things are built in native. And when you ask for things like the amount of native support in this game, I think this game is way more powerful native to native. But WoW doesn't choose to do that. WoW chooses to have X thousand just free, unpaid employees developing for them that are not paid by Blizzard. So if they're making money, it's on their own. It's not Blizzard's problem. And they're developing for them so that every player can go out there and download, whatever dozen or 2 dozen or whatever combination of add-ons to create the exact experience they're looking for. There isn't anything like that. There is a DPS meter that's called ACT that's fairly common. I think there's more than that, but ACT is the most popular parser. That's really it. Now, raid design is accounted with this in mind. So knowing that people don't have a DBM, you have, which is a deadly boss mobs. It's what kind of pops up different timers for people in WoW. 14, there's no weak auras. There's nothing like that. But your UI, it has the same flashing dotted lines. There's different things like that you can do. Bosses, it's never like, oh, you always stand in green on this fight, but not in green on this fight. So like it is more designed around knowing you don't have a DBM. But you have to do the content, and that's just where we're at. So there is a bigger. It feels like there's a bigger bodder community in 14 than there is in WoW, but against terms of service. So positionals. Positionals are something that exists here, and that matters, especially with certain classes. You do more damage based on the position you're in. So when you look at like optimal melee DPS, like position matters, and that's something that I don't really feel is the case in WoW. I'm sure you guys remember like the front and the back of the boss, but now you're looking at, there's just a lot going on here. And so positionals are one of the things that add complexity. When we talk about that slower global cooldown, they of course are going to make it more interesting by making you weave in and out and stand in a specific spot. I'm not a melee DPS player, so I can't really elaborate much more than that, but I do hear lots of whining when people first come over and they're like, oh, I can't quite figure this out. So there's plenty of good like guides and things like that out there. And speaking of guides, the people are really nice here. Now, I don't know, maybe if we put our minds to it, we can be just as toxic as WoW one day. Because when I first started playing WoW, it wasn't toxic. And I've been so heavily invested in guilds and stuff over the years that I haven't really been that exposed to the public. I don't spend a lot of time in trade chat or Barons General or anything like that. But it's really nice. The community is totally different. Everybody's very helpful. If you go into content for the first time, you say, hey, it's my first time. You tend to get tips instead of getting booted. People are really nice, and I don't know what causes that. I don't know if it's the commendation system or it's the fact that if you're super rude, they will ban you. I don't know what leads to it, but as of today, it's a fairly positive experience. That's not to say you can't find toxicity. If you run the new raid or trial, which is your 8-man content, if you run that on day one and you wipe more than once, there are going to be people like, ugh, can't believe you wiped more than once, even though literally nobody in here has ever seen this. And so like there are dicks, absolutely. There are, but overall the community is overwhelmingly positive. Now the other side of that is the community is incredibly sensitive and protective of that. So if you come into this game as a new player and you bash story, or you bash the community, or you bash content, and you do not know what you're talking about, you will get slammed. Even if you do know what you're talking about, you will get slammed. Go look at the comments section on any video that Bryan and I have ever published where we had a criticism of 14. We are huge fans of 14. Bryan is a fanboy to the point where when he says content is going to be good, I kind of have to only 3/4 of the way believe him. He's one of my closest friends, and I just have to know, all right, so let me ask him why. Because he has a really good thought process, and there might be a reason. But it also might just be that he's being a fanboy. Because Bryan loves this game. And yet he puts out a video called like Why I Think the Game is in Need of Change, titles it Why Final Fantasy XIV is Dying. And because of the clickbaity title and because of the topic, people come in and just slam us. I constantly get updates on my phone. Anytime there's a new comment on that video, and it's just like, you're a terrible person, like get out of here. Some of them are death threats. And so this community, it takes it really seriously. And they say things like, I hope you get cancer, which is awesome. Really cool. So as long as you're nice, they're nice. But just know, don't come in here and just drop like, whoa, when I was in WoW. They don't like being compared to WoW that much. It's just a sensitive issue. I do it, and I just know that I'm going to catch some flack for it. The second thing when we talk about content, healers need to DPS. Now, I make guides saying if you've never healed before, don't worry about DPSing. Not required. Because I want you to learn to heal. But once you are actively healing, there is downtime. And during that downtime, you have damage abilities and you have mana available. And so when you get into super in-game content, so as WoW players who are used to raiding and M pluses and stuff like that, just expect that down the line, you're going to be DPSing. The global cooldowns are a really long time and you might as well use them. No need to overheal. You guys know what overhealing is if you're coming from WoW. The 14 community isn't necessarily as aware of it because without a DPS meter or a threat meter, not everybody in 14 knows exactly what they're doing. The ACT doesn't even run on PlayStation. So like me as a PlayStation player, even though I play with keyboard and mouse, I don't have any awareness of my DPS. Even if I wanted to break terms of service, I couldn't. I would have to ask a PC player, hey, how are my numbers looking? And so that's kind of something you need to think about. Tanking is very simple in this game, but there's a lot of pressure on it because you need to know all the content. And people don't like putting up with tanks that fail. As nice as they are, you need to be really, if you're learning to tank in this game, be sure you tell people, this is my first time in this dungeon and things like that. Because you don't just, because the content is paced differently, there isn't a lot of crowd control and stuff like that. And so when you get into roulettes that people need to do for their weekly tomes, they encourage you to do things like do big multi-pulls as soon as you're capable. And so you're managing a lot of things because there aren't as many needs for stuns and sleeps. And because we don't have an M+, we really just have the normal content. Once we get over-geared for content, it just gets easier and easier, and people expect you to clear it very quickly. They do, and it puts a lot of pressure on tanks and a lot of pressure on healers. You do have Adventurer Indeed, which is kind of the same thing as in WoW, so like if you want to level your tank, you should. It's a great way to get a lot of bonus loot and get instant queues, and I think tanking is really fun in this game. But just be aware that like people have expectations around this. So they are polite, they are nice, but like it's not that, like if you come in here and you act like a jerk and you're like, well, I thought everybody would be nice to me. Like there still is another side to this community. So just be aware of that. But overall, like I am blown away by how much like devotion and how much passion there is in this community, the amount of fan art out there, and just the way that the devs interact and there's this communication back and forth. And it's an incredible place to be a creator. And like Bryan and I wouldn't change 14 for anything in the world. We are not just a 14 channel, but when we put out content and it gets positively engaged with, we want to make more of that content. And so you can see over our last 1,500 videos or whatever, 14 has dominated it because every time we put out something for 14, everybody's like, you guys are awesome. And every time I put out stuff for another game, And so we find that it's a really fun and easy community to engage with. And there's just so many wonderful, open, and nice people. So welcome to Final Fantasy. WoW will be waiting for you if you ever go back. I logged in after all that. I took several years off, and when I logged back in, yes, my gold is worth nothing, but my items were right where I left them. My mounts were right where I left them. So if you're looking at making the switch, the trial is available for both games. So just like when you try for WoW, but keep in mind, it's just like a WoW trial. It gets you to level 35. The level cap for the first expansion was 50. So that's literally like letting you get to like 40-ish in WoW. And so it does give you a feel for the combat system, but you're not even going to unlock the first round of in-game abilities and the first round of in-game content. It is not a timed trial. So if you want to try all the classes to 35 before you buy it, you get to keep all that progress. Go nuts. Occasionally they give out free copies of the game to like Amazon Prime members or whatever. So if you want to kind of slowly move up, but at some point there, you will be moving to that point to paying. The subscription's about the same cost per month. So I would just kind of view those as equal investments. I view it as $1 per hour. So as long as I can play each game at least 15 hours a month, it's worth it in my opinion. And that's definitely not hard to do with these games. These games are both huge. There is so much to do. And the number of things that these games have in common, but a different interpretation on, is incredible. Like the triple triad is this out in the world, you go find trainers and you play them in these, and then you have battle pet systems, and they're different but both awesome. So there are so many things that it's great to see, like, wow, I really like their take on this, and I really appreciate that. So absolutely, it's a great time to join the game. At the time of this recording, we are coming up on Shadowbringers. We just got like our last, I believe, patch. We're coming up on our last live letter, which will talk about all the battle system changes upcoming. And then we'll be moving into new content. And every 3.5 months or so, we will get a new dungeon or a new trial and stuff like that. There's different rules for what you get on even numbered content patch cycles versus odds. So 0.1, 0.3, and we'll have the same, 0.2, 0.4, so on. So you kind of get the hang of that. So, and we've gone to 3.5, 4.5. So I assume that we'll go to 5.5. That seems to be a fair pace for them, what they can get done in 2 years. So my name is Chris with Work to Game. I hope that you guys found this interesting. I know it's a very long video. I'm going to go ahead and link the Reddit article if you want to see kind of how they elaborate on this. It's really well written, and I think that it makes a lot of fair points. I just wanted to kind of elaborate on it from my point of view as somebody who's played both games. So once again, my name is Chris with Work to Game. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.
What is Work to Game? 30 seconds, go! Work to Game is basically a channel where we talk about video games, anything we like about video games. We sometimes post vlog videos about something else that we just want to talk about. We kind of have a schedule. It changes all the time. It's in the About section on YouTube. We also stream over on Twitch just anytime we want to play games. Right now, it's happening more and more. I don't know what's happening at the time you watch this video, but the best thing you could do is click on the About page and kind of see if there's a rough plan that we have here